Dana Pruitt felt the whole ocean go quiet, and then a wall of grey came at her sideways, faster than something that size had any right to move. The pectoral fin, wide as a mainsail and streaked with barnacles, curled over her head and pinned her against the humpback's chest. She pushed, she kicked. The whale did not care. It held her there in the cold dark of its own shadow, while 20 feet away, a triangular fin kept circling and would not leave. Before we go any further, drop a comment telling me what part of the world you're listening from, and hit subscribe so you don't miss stories like this one. The Kona coast on a July morning is a specific kind of quiet. The trade winds haven't picked up yet. The swells are long and lazy, and the water off the drop-off runs a shade of blue that looks almost fake in photographs. Dana had been drifting with the current for nearly 20 minutes when the humpback changed direction. It had been circling at a polite distance the way the big ones sometimes did, when curious but not yet committed. And then it wasn't at that polite distance anymore. It came at her with a purposeful speed that made her stomach drop. Not aggressive, no display, no bubble curtain, no charge. Just a committed arc that closed the space between them before she could back fin clear. She tried to angle downward. The whale adjusted with unsettling precision. Her tank scraped the underside of the fin and rang once, a dull metallic note that seemed too small for how big the moment felt. Her gauge read 280 pounds, enough air but barely. And she could not see Scott, could not see the boat, could not see anything but the barnacled underside of a mammal older and heavier than her whole life. She pushed at the rubbery skin. The whale answered with a slow, patient press that was not violence but was not negotiable either. Then she felt it. A pressure wave, low and focused, coming from somewhere to her left. She did not hear it. She felt it in her chest and in the roof of her mouth, the way you feel a truck downshifting on the highway before you hear the engine catch. The whale went absolutely still. Not passive still. The stillness of something watching. Dana's pulse hit her in the throat. For the first time since the fin had come down over her, she stopped pushing. She could not say why. Maybe it was the low click she felt through the animal's chest rather than heard. Maybe it was that the whale had stopped adjusting and simply held its position now, as if giving her a choice she had not known she'd been asked to make. She pressed her palm flat against the cool grey skin and held on. She held on the way she used to hold on to the porch rail of her grandfather's fishing cabin in a bad storm, back when she was 7 years old and did not know yet that the world could hurt you in ways that had nothing to do with weather. They rose together. The whale tilted on the ascent so the fin angled away from her, and Dana slid up along its side like water off a sloped roof. She broke the surface, pulled the regulator free, and gasped warm Hawaiian air. Scott Harney was already swinging the boat around, standing at the wheel and shielding his eyes. The engine changed pitch. He was shouting something she could not hear over the drum of her own heartbeat. Dana turned back to look at the water she had just left, and saw it. A triangular fin, dark and wide at the base, cutting a slow circle not 20 feet from where she had been hovering. A tiger shark. Broad and unhurried, still working the same patch of blue as if nothing had happened. It had never left. It had been waiting, she understood in one clean second, for the whale to move first. She climbed aboard without speaking. The humpback surfaced once, far out, breathed a great pillar of vapor into the morning, and went under for good. Scott put a towel around her shoulders and asked what had happened down there. Dana kept her eyes on the flat water where the shark's fin had been, no longer visible, which somehow made it worse, and said she was still figuring that out. The boat was called the Ruth Alden, after Dana's old mentor, and Scott had painted the name on the transom himself the winter Ruth passed, using a stiff brush and marine enamel that had run a little on the second N because his hand had not been steady that day. The Ruth Alden was 32 feet of working aluminum with a wheelhouse that leaked in a specific corner during hard rain and a dive platform that Scott had welded on himself using scrap from an old barge that used to run cane out of Hilo. It was not pretty. It was reliable. Reliable in the shallow reefs off the Kona coast mattered more than pretty. Scott brought her a mug of coffee from the thermos on the dash and did not push. He was in his early 50s, wide across the shoulders, wide across the face, with the kind of sun creases you get from 20 years of squinting at open water. His hands trembled just a little as he passed her the mug, which surprised her because in the 9 years she had known him, she had never once seen Scott Harney's hands do anything but exactly what he told them to do. "You saw it," she said. "I saw a lot of it," he said. "I saw the whale come in. I saw you not come up. I saw the whale not come up. I saw a shape moving in the water off the port beam, and I did not like the shape. Then I saw the whale roll, and I saw you slide off her, and I got the boat around." "Her?" "She had a calf up around the point last winter," Scott said. "I know her." Dana looked at him. "How long have you known her?" "Long enough," Scott said, and turned the wheel south toward Kailua and did not say anything else about it for a while. Dana Pruitt was 34 years old that summer, and she had been working the humpback survey off West Hawaii for 4 seasons. She had come out of a doctoral program at Oregon State with a specialty in cetacean vocalization and a marriage that had not survived the last year of dissertation writing, and she had taken the Kona post in part because it paid enough to eat and in part because it put an entire ocean between her and Portland. Her research question, the one the university and the federal grant were interested in, was whether humpback mothers in the North Pacific were changing their song patterns in response to increased vessel traffic in the Auau Channel and along the Kona coast. Her real question, the one she asked herself in the dark at night, was quieter and older and had to do with why she felt more at home 200 feet from a 50,000-pound animal than she ever had felt across a kitchen table. She had been down that morning to change out a hydrophone anchor at the 80-foot ledge. It was a routine swap. She had done it a dozen times. The humpback should not have been there at all. In late July, the mothers and calves were long gone to Alaska, and the singers had followed them by Memorial Day. The only humpbacks left in Hawaiian water in July were a handful of stragglers, animals with reasons of their own, and she had not planned her dive around one showing up. Scott put the boat on autopilot for the run-in and came back to the dive deck and sat down across from her. He took a long look at the empty water behind them, and then at her face, and then at his own hands. "Dana," he said, "I have to tell you something, and I do not know how to lead into it, so I'm going to just say it." "All right." "Somebody paid me last month to keep an eye on your dives," he said. "I did not take the money, but somebody offered it, and they knew where and when we were going out today." She set the coffee down. "Who?" she said. "That's the part I'm still figuring out," Scott said. "I've got a name, but it isn't the top of the ladder, and I don't like what I think is at the top." The Kailua harbor was busy when they came in. Snorkel catamarans loaded with cruise passengers were pulling out for the afternoon run to the Captain Cook Monument, and the parking lot up above the pier was full of rental cars with the windows still fogged from the AC. Dana helped Scott tie off, and she felt like she was moving underwater still, half a second behind everything. Her ears rang. Her mouth tasted like salt and copper. When she stepped from the boat to the dock, her legs came out from under her for one absurd second, and Scott caught her under the arm and held her until she found her balance. "You need to sit down somewhere with air conditioning," he said. "I need to look at something first," she said. The something was the hydrophone data. She had a laptop in the truck and a hard drive on the boat, and she wanted to see whether the array had picked up the click she had felt in her chest through the whale's skin, because she was almost sure now that the click had not come from the whale. It had come from somewhere else, and it had come at a frequency and a rhythm that she recognized from 3 winters of watching humpback social calls in the calving grounds off Maui. And if she was right about what it was, then what had happened in the water that morning was a lot more than luck. She was right. She sat in the driver's seat of her old Tacoma with the door open and the sea wind coming through and the laptop balanced on her thighs, and she scrolled through the waveform with a finger that would not quite stop shaking. There it was. 2 clear pulse trains, low and directional, coming from a source that was not the whale that had held her. There had been a second humpback in the water, farther off, deeper down, calling, and the whale that had pinned her against its chest had answered exactly once, in a short, low note that Dana had recorded before in mother-calf reunions and never anywhere else. She closed the laptop and sat there for a minute with her hand over her mouth. Then she called Owen Reyes. Owen was a colleague at the Marine Lab up in Kauai High, a compact, patient man in his late 40s who wore reading glasses on a lanyard and had been Ruth Alden's last graduate student before Ruth had died. Ruth had built the Humpback Survey program from a single hydrophone and a folding chair, and when the cancer had taken her 4 years back, she had left her notes and her boat and her contacts to a young woman she had met at a conference in Vancouver and taken an unreasonable liking to, and to Owen, who had known her longer and cared more than any of the university brass ever bothered to know. He picked up on the second ring. "Owen, I need you to come look at something. You sound like somebody who has been running." "I've been holding my breath for about half an hour," she said. "I need you at the lab, and I need you to bring the Calving Ground archive, the one Ruth catalogued herself. I can be there in 90 minutes. Bring extra coffee," she said. She sat on the tailgate of the truck with the sun coming down hard on her shoulders and tried to think through what she was going to say to Owen when he arrived. She kept coming back to Scott's face, the way he had said somebody paid me last month, the way he had said I've got a name but it isn't the top of the ladder. She thought about the second humpback in the water. She thought about the tiger shark that had never left. She thought about Ruth, who had once told her on a windy pier in Vancouver over cold chowder that the ocean was the only honest thing in the world because it did not pretend. She thought most of all about a marking she had glimpsed on the underside of the whale's fin just before the animal had rolled and let her go. A pale scar, curved, almost the shape of a fishhook, but bigger. A scar she had photographed once before, 4 years ago, on a young humpback calf that had been trailing fishing gear in the channel off Makena, and that she and Ruth and a rescue team had spent 2 days freeing. She had named that calf, on the paperwork, Halo, because the scar had looked like a crescent of light. Halo would be 5 years old this summer. Halo would be exactly the right size to be the whale that had held her. Owen arrived in an hour and 11 minutes. He climbed the stairs of the Marine Lab with a canvas bag on his shoulder and did not ask questions until they were both in front of the workstation with the door closed. Dana played the pulse train for him twice. Then she played the low answering note from the whale that had held her. Then she pulled up a photograph she had taken 4 winters before in the calving grounds off Molokini of a young calf with a curved scar on the underside of the left pectoral fin. Owen looked at the photograph for a long time. "That's Halo," he said. "That's Halo," she agreed. "You're telling me that Halo, 5 years old, an entire ocean away from where she should be in July, came to your location off the Kona Ledge and put herself between you and a tiger shark. I'm telling you what I saw. I'm telling you what the acoustics recorded, and I'm telling you that whoever paid Scott Harney to watch my dives knew exactly where I was going to be in the water today." Owen took off his glasses, folded them, put them on the desk in front of him, and stared at them for a while, as if the glasses might have an opinion. "Dana," he said, "I need to tell you something too, and I've been sitting on it for a couple of weeks." She waited. "Somebody has been asking questions about your grant renewal," Owen said. not through the usual channels, through the state legislature. I got a call from a friend on the Natural Resources Committee last Thursday. The word she used was pressure. Somebody has been putting pressure on the committee to defund the Kona hydrophone array before the fall vote on the West Hawaii Sanctuary expansion. The West Hawaii Sanctuary expansion was a proposal to extend the Humpback National Marine Sanctuary boundaries down the entire Kona coast, from Upolu Point in the north, almost to South Point in the south. It would put roughly 40 miles of coastline under enhanced federal protection. It would also make it functionally impossible for anyone to build a large deep-water marina anywhere along that shoreline for the next generation. There was exactly one large deep-water marina project currently in the permitting process on the Kona coast. It was called Kohala Point Marina Village, and it was owned by a holding company whose principal shareholder was a woman named Marla Whitfield. Marla Whitfield, Dana said. Or her son, Owen said. Or somebody working for one of them. Her son, Blake. Blake. Dana sat down. She had been standing without noticing it. She looked at the framed photograph on the wall above the workstation, a photograph of Ruth Alden at the wheel of the boat that now had her name on the transom, taken the year before the cancer. And Ruth was laughing at something the photographer had said, and her hair was full of salt. I want to see the file on the Whitfields, Dana said. There isn't a file on the Whitfields, Owen said. There's a file on the Marina project. That's public. What we don't have is anything that connects Marla or Blake to grant interference, and we sure as hell don't have anything that connects them to a boat captain being offered money to watch your dives. Then we build one, she said. She did not go home that night. She slept on the fold-out cot in the corner of the lab office and dreamed of the underside of a fin coming down over her head. When she woke up at 4 a.m. to the sound of a rooster 3 blocks over, she sat up in the dark and understood, all at once and with unreasonable certainty, that whoever had paid Scott to watch her had known where she would be that morning, because someone at the lab had told them. There was no other way. Her dive plan was on a shared calendar. She had trusted the wrong person somewhere in her working life, and she needed to find out who. Scott came by the lab at 8 the next morning with a name on a folded piece of paper. He put it on the desk in front of her without looking at it. The name on the paper was Terry Bishop. Terry Bishop was a 68-year-old commercial fisherman out of Honokohau Harbor who ran a 52-foot-long liner named the Second Wind and who had 20 years earlier taught Scott Harney how to gaff an ahi without losing a finger. Scott had known him since Scott was 17 years old. Terry was the person, Scott told her flatly, who had come to him with the offer. How much? Dana said. $4,000, Scott said, for a summer of dive logs. Where you were going, what times, what depths, whether you were pulling gear or setting new gear. He said it was for a documentary crew that wanted to film you without you knowing. He said he didn't want to know why they wanted it. You didn't believe him. No, ma'am, I did not. But he isn't the top of the ladder. Terry Bishop does not know how to spell holding company, Scott said. Somebody handed him a stack of cash and told him to hand it to me, and Terry did what he was told, because Terry has a boat payment and a granddaughter starting college in the fall and no health insurance, and because Terry Bishop is exactly the kind of man who does not ask the second question when you offer him the first $4,000. Who handed him the cash? Scott looked out the window for a long time. That's what I'm going to find out today, he said. Do not come with me. Do not call me. If Terry sees you within a mile of him, he'll clam up and I'll get nothing. If I get anything, I'll be back here by dinner. He was not back by dinner. He was not back by midnight either. At 2 a.m, Dana was on the concrete pier at Honokohau Harbor with a flashlight and a bad feeling, and she found the Second Wind tied off in Terry Bishop's slip with all the running lights off and no one aboard, and she found the Ruth Alden 2 slips down with the wheelhouse door open, and Scott's coffee thermos still on the dash, and Scott's cell phone lying on the deck with the screen cracked. Owen picked her up an hour later. She could not stop shaking, and she was not sure whether it was from the ocean-cold night wind coming off the harbour mouth or from the last 2 days catching up with her all at once. Owen drove her back to the lab and made her eat 2 pieces of toast, and made her drink a glass of water, and sat with her while she called the sheriff's dispatch and reported Scott Harney missing. At 9 the next morning, the Marine Safety Office found the Ruth Alden's dinghy adrift a mile north of the harbour, empty, oars unshipped, no sign of struggle. At 10, they found Terry Bishop sitting on a bar stool at a Kailua tourist bar with a black eye and a story that he refused to change. Terry Bishop said he had gotten drunk and fallen down and had no idea where Scott Harney was and had never in his life offered anyone $4,000 for anything. Dana sat in the lab that afternoon and stared at the photograph of Ruth on the wall and told herself out loud that she was not going to cry because she did not have time to cry. She had 1 week until the West Hawaii Sanctuary hearing. She had 1 week to figure out how to prove that Marla Whitfield or Blake Whitfield or someone connected to them had been trying to sabotage her research, had bought off a fisherman, had made a boat captain disappear, and if she was reading it right, had known enough about a young humpback that Ruth Alden had named Halo 4 years ago to place a betting man somewhere in the water that morning, because whoever had told Terry Bishop where to find Scott had known that Halo was in the water, and the only people in the world who should have known that Halo was in Kona water in July were Dana Pruitt, Owen Reyes, and the ghost of Ruth Alden. Someone else knew. Someone else had been watching Halo. Someone else had understood, before Dana did, that the whale mattered. She said this out loud to Owen. Owen listened without interrupting. When she was finished, he took off his glasses again and rubbed the bridge of his nose and told her, in a voice she had not heard him use before, that he thought she needed to talk to Rachel Whitfield. Rachel Whitfield was Blake Whitfield's daughter. She was 26 years old, a graduate of the marine biology program at the University of Hawaii at Hilo, and she worked, when she wasn't fighting with her father about it, as a volunteer with the Sea Turtle Rescue Program on the Kohala coast. Dana had met her once, at a public meeting the previous winter, and Rachel had waited until after the meeting to introduce herself. Dana remembered that she had been quiet, tall, careful with her words, and that she had said, before walking away into the parking lot, that she was sorry for what her family was doing and that she was not proud of the name on the front of her driver's license. Owen said he had Rachel's number. Dana called her at 4 that afternoon. Rachel Whitfield agreed to meet her the next morning at a coffee shop in Waimea, up in the cool country above the coast, in a converted plantation building where the tourists did not go and the ranchers did. She was already at a corner table when Dana walked in. A tall young woman in a canvas jacket with her hair pulled back and her hands wrapped around a mug she had not yet drunk from, and Dana knew from her face that Rachel had not slept either. "I don't know how to do this," Rachel said, before Dana had even sat down, "so I'm going to tell you what I know and you can decide what to do with it." "Tell me," Dana said. "My father did not just want the marina," Rachel said. "My father needed the marina. There's a debt. My grandmother made investments during the recession that did not work out, and the family holdings are leveraged in ways that are not public. If the sanctuary expansion passes in September, the marina permit dies, and the family's line of credit dies with it. My father is not a criminal, Ms. Pruitt. My father is a man who is running out of time and has convinced himself that the ends justify the means. That is worse than a criminal. Criminals know what they are." "What has he done?" "He has hired a public relations firm to run a campaign against your research program. He has funneled money through a political action committee to 2 members of the state senate. He has, I am told by my aunt, retained a private investigator to look into your personal life. I do not know if any of this is illegal. Some of it probably is not." But I know that my father is desperate, and I know that a desperate man with money is a genuinely dangerous animal. And I know that a boat captain that I have never met is now missing at sea. You knew about Scott Harney. I heard my father on the phone at 3 o'clock this morning. He was on the lanai. He did not know I was awake. He said the words boat captain, and he said the word problem, and he said that whatever had been done by people who did not report to him, and that he did not want to know their names. Dana felt the coffee shop go a little far away. Rachel, she said, the morning I was in the water 2 days ago, the humpback that pinned me, there was a shark near me. It was not a coincidence. Rachel's eyes filled up with tears she did not let fall. I do not know for certain, she said. But I know that my father spent the entire month of June asking a man from the State Fisheries Office questions about tiger shark predation patterns in the deep water off the Kona Ledge. I know that in early July, he asked a marine biologist at a cocktail party at my grandmother's house whether it was possible to attract a large predator to a specific coordinate using bait and current. I do not know if he did anything with those answers. I do not know if the shark that circled you was the same shark he had been researching. I know that the questions were asked. I know that a woman who is a stranger to me almost died in the water 2 mornings ago, and I know that my father was awake at 3 o'clock this morning worrying about a boat captain, and I know that if I do not tell someone what I heard, then I am the second worst person in my family, and I'm not willing to be that. Dana reached across the table and put her hand over Rachel Whitfield's. She did it before she decided to do it. Rachel looked down at the 2 hands, and then up at Dana's face, and something in her shoulders came down 1/2 inch. I need everything you can give me, Dana said. Names, dates, phone calls you overheard, anything. I have 5 days until the sanctuary hearing. I have a boat captain who has vanished. I have a research program that is about to be defunded. And I have a whale who saved my life for reasons I do not understand yet. I need everything. You will have it by tomorrow morning, Rachel said. But there is one more thing you need to know, and I do not know how to say it, so I am going to just say it, and you are going to have to sit with it, because I have been sitting with it for a year. Say it. My grandmother, Rachel said. Marla. She was the one who fought Ruth Alden the first time, 10 years ago, when Ruth was pushing for the original sanctuary designation. My grandmother spent almost $1 million to defeat that expansion. She succeeded. Ruth Alden died 2 years later, and my grandmother wrote a very kind obituary in the paper, and I heard her say to a friend of hers at a Christmas party that Ruth had been a formidable opponent and that she was almost sorry there wouldn't be a rematch. Your grandmother is proud of what she did to Ruth. My grandmother is proud of a great many things, Miss Pruitt, and none of them are things I would put on a headstone. But I want you to understand what you are up against. It is not just my father. It is 30 years of a family that has learned over and over that they can win. Do not walk in there next week thinking you are fighting a real estate developer. You are fighting a woman who has never lost a fight she considered important, and she is going to consider you important. Dana drove back down the mountain that afternoon with the windows open and Waimea's cool green fading into Kona's dry brown, and her hands steady on the wheel for the first time in 3 days. When she got back to the lab, there was a message on Owen's desk phone from the sheriff's office. Scott Harney had been found alive at 6 that morning by a fishing boat out of Kauai, floating on a life ring 12 miles offshore. He had a concussion and a broken wrist and a story that he was giving to the sheriff and not to anyone else until his lawyer got there. Dana drove to the hospital. Scott was awake and sitting up. His right wrist was in a sling, and his left temple had a bruise the color of a thunderstorm, and he took one look at her, and his eyes filled up, and he said, "I am so sorry, Dana. You have nothing to be sorry for." "I do," he said. "I have plenty. Sit down. Close the door." She closed the door. She sat down. She waited. "I did not tell you everything the other day," Scott said, "about Terry Bishop, about the money. I told you Terry offered me $4,000. That was true. What I did not tell you was that Terry Bishop is not the first person who has ever offered me money to watch a scientist working the Kona coast. 12 years ago, when I was still running Charter, a lawyer for a woman named Marla Whitfield offered me $8,000 to keep an eye on a marine biologist named Ruth Alden. She wanted to know where Ruth was setting hydrophones. She wanted to know when Ruth was meeting with the state. She wanted to know who Ruth was talking to on the phone. I said no. I said no because Ruth was a friend of my mother's, and I would not do it to her. But I did not tell Ruth about the offer. And 2 months later, Ruth found out that her office at the lab had been broken into, and her fieldwork data had been copied, and her funding pipeline had a leak in it, and she never knew where the leak was. And I sat on that for 12 years, Dana. I sat on it because I had told myself that I hadn't done anything. And then, last month, a fisherman I have known since I was 17 years old walks up to me on the pier with $4,000 in a paper bag and asks me the same question. And I realize that I did not save Ruth by saying no. I only saved myself. And I decided this time I was going to do something different. I told you what I told you. I went to find Terry. Terry told me that the money had come from a man in a suit who was not local and who did not give a name. I told Terry I was going to the sheriff. Terry begged me not to. And then 2 men who were not Terry got on my boat that night. And the last thing I remember before waking up in the water is a hand coming down on the back of my head. Dana did not speak. She put her hand on Scott's forearm above the sling. Scott put his other hand on top of hers. "I owe Ruth Alden an apology I cannot give her," he said, "so I am going to give it to you instead. And I am going to be at that hearing next week, and I am going to tell them everything, on the record. All of it. The offer 12 years ago, the offer last month, all of it. Scott, if you go on the record about that, you may lose your captain's license." "I know. You may face charges for not reporting the first offer." "I know that too. There are people who cannot afford to hear you talk in public. There are people who have already tried to keep you from talking." "I know all of it, Dana. I have known all of it since the moment I woke up in the ocean at 2 o'clock in the morning with salt water in my nose and no boat in sight. I have made my decision. Sometimes a man does not get to be forgiven. Sometimes he only gets to be useful. I am going to be useful." Dana drove back to the lab and sat at Ruth Alden's old desk and cried for about 10 minutes with her forehead in her hands. And then she pulled herself together and got to work. The next 4 days were the longest 4 days of her adult life. She and Owen worked 18-hour shifts. Rachel Whitfield brought them a folder every morning at 7 o'clock, dropped off in the mailbox of the lab, unsigned, containing photocopies of phone records and appointment calendars, and on the 3rd morning, a copy of a wire transfer from a Delaware holding company to a public relations firm in Honolulu, made out to a project titled Coastal Communications Initiative, which turned out to be the name of the anti-sanctuary campaign that had been buying newspaper ads on the Big Island for the past 3 months. On the 2nd day, Dana went out on the water alone. She took a small skiff belonging to the lab. She did not tell Owen. She motored out to the 80-foot ledge with a hydrophone and a camera and a great deal of anger, and she dropped the hydrophone and listened for the pulse train she had recorded the morning Halo had saved her. And she waited. For 2 hours, nothing. Then, at the far edge of her hearing, she picked it up. A pulse train, slow and directional, from somewhere north of her position. She started the skiff and moved a 1/4 mile north and stopped and listened again. Louder. She moved another 1/4 mile. Louder still. She moved a 3rd time, and this time she did not need the hydrophone, because 2 humpbacks broke the surface 100 yards off her port bow, one large and one slightly smaller. and the smaller one had a curved, pale scar on the underside of the left pectoral fin, and Halo raised the fin clear of the water once, deliberately, as if in greeting, and then rolled and went under. The larger whale surfaced again 50 yards closer. It was an old female. It was, Dana realized with a chill she felt in her scalp, Halo's mother. The mother that Dana and Ruth and the rescue team had worked next to for 2 days off Makina 4 winters back, freeing a small calf from a wrapping of trawler line. The mother had never come within 100 feet of them then. She had circled at a distance and watched, in the way an intelligent, nervous parent watches strangers approach her frightened child. Now she came within 30 feet of Dana's skiff, rolled onto her side, and looked at her with one dark eye the size of a dinner plate, and blew a slow, warm breath across the water. She held that position for maybe 8 seconds. Then she rolled back under, and the 2 whales moved off together to the north, and Dana sat in the skiff with her hand pressed to her mouth and a feeling in her chest that she did not have a scientific word for. She motored back to Honokohau at sunset, and she did not tell Owen where she had been, and she did not put the encounter in the survey logs. Some things, Ruth had said to her once, the ocean tells you and expects you to keep between you and the ocean. Not everything is data. On the 3rd day, the state senator whose vote had been considered the swing vote on the sanctuary hearing announced that he was recusing himself, citing a scheduling conflict. Owen threw a coffee mug across the room. Dana caught it before it hit the wall by pure luck and put it back on the desk without saying anything, and Owen apologized to the mug and to her and sat down and put his head in his hands. Late that afternoon, Rachel called. Her voice was tight. "My father knows I have been talking to you." "How?" "He does not know from my end. He knows from someone else's end. He has not accused me. He has been very warm today, and my grandmother has been very warm, and my father invited me to lunch tomorrow at the club, which he has not done in 9 months. And I do not think this is because he has missed his daughter's company." "Rachel, get on a plane." "I am not getting on a plane. I have one more thing to give you, and I am giving it to you tonight. Meet me at the beach at Anaehumalu at 8 o'clock. Come alone." Dana went. She parked in the sandy lot at Anaehumalu Bay and walked down the crushed coral path toward the water, and the sky was the color of old copper over the ocean, and Rachel Whitfield was standing near the tide pools with an envelope in her hand. "There is an audio recording on this thumb drive," Rachel said. "My father does not know I own the property he uses for his weekend meetings. My mother left it to me before she died. I put a small recorder in the lanai of that house 4 months ago because I had begun to be afraid. The recorder is voice-activated. It has captured, among other things, a conversation between my father and a man he introduces as Ken on the 23rd of June, in which my father asks Ken whether he can arrange to have a large shark in the water at a specific set of coordinates on the morning of the 12th of July, and Ken tells him it is possible but not cheap, and my father says he does not care what it costs, and Ken says he will need 3 weeks, and he will need to know the target schedule, and my father says the schedule will be provided." Dana held the envelope in her hand and did not open it. "Rachel, I am not sorry I recorded my father. I am sorry the world made it necessary for me to give this to the sheriff, not to a newspaper, not to a lawyer, not to your program officer. Give it to the sheriff and be somewhere else when you do it, because my father is not the only person who is going to come looking for whoever has this. Come with me. I cannot. If I disappear tonight, my grandmother will know within an hour that I am the source, and she will spend the rest of her considerable life making sure that everyone I love pays for it. I have to be at that lunch tomorrow. I have to be my father's daughter for 1 more week. After the hearing, I will come find you. I promise. Rachel, I promise." She turned and walked away down the crushed coral path toward the parking lot, tall and straight in the copper light. And Dana stood there with the envelope in her hand and watched her go. And she did not know then that she was watching Rachel Whitfield walk away for what would be the last time for a long, hard month. She drove straight to the sheriff's substation in Kailua that night. She did not go home. She did not stop at the lab. She sat in a small, windowless interview room with a detective named Alan Chun, and she gave him the thumb drive and the copies of the phone records and the wire transfer receipts and the sworn statement she had written up that afternoon with the help of a lawyer at the Environmental Defense Fund. And Detective Chun listened without interrupting for 2.5 hours, and then he made her stay in the sheriff's parking lot for another hour while he coordinated with the state attorney general's office by phone. And then he told her that she needed to disappear for the next 3 days, and that he was not going to tell her where, and that when she surfaced again on the morning of the hearing, she was going to walk into the meeting room with a deputy on either side of her, and she was not going to leave that room without an escort, and that if she did not do exactly what he told her to do, he could not guarantee her safety. And she said, "Yes, sir." She spent the next 3 days at a cattle ranch above Waimea, belonging to a friend of Owen Reyes's, in a bunkhouse with 2 horses in a paddock outside her window and no cell service, and a book of Ruth Alden's field notes that Owen had put in her bag when she was not looking. She read Ruth's notes at night by kerosene lamp, and Ruth's handwriting was sharp and neat and impatient, and Ruth had underlined, on the last page of the last notebook of the winter before she died, a sentence Dana had never seen before. The sentence read, "The Kona pod is not just visiting. Something is bringing them back." The morning of the hearing, Dana came down out of the ranch country in the passenger seat of a sheriff's cruiser at 5 in the morning, in the dry, cold, pre-dawn dark. Detective Chun met them at the base of the hill and took over the driving, and they came into Kailua just as the first pink was showing over the shoulder of the mountain behind the town. There were television trucks in the parking lot of the community center. There was a crowd of about 200 people on the lawn already, some in aloha shirts and some in surf t-shirts, and a small tight cluster of very expensive suits at the front. And Marla Whitfield was in the middle of that cluster, small and silver-haired and beautifully dressed and standing very straight, and Blake Whitfield was standing next to her, and Blake Whitfield's face was grey under the tan. Dana walked into the meeting room with Detective Chun on her left and a uniformed deputy on her right, and Scott Harney was already inside, sitting in the front row of the public seating with his wrist still in a sling and his hair combed, and a plain grey shirt tucked into plain grey slacks, and Owen was next to Scott, and they saved her a seat between them. The hearing was scheduled to last 4 hours. The vote was scheduled at the end. At the 90-minute mark, when the pro-development side had finished its scheduled presentation and the room was breaking for coffee, Detective Chun walked to the podium at the front of the room and asked very politely for one additional item to be added to the record. He then played, at full volume, a 2-minute segment of the audio recording that had been sitting on the sheriff's evidence server for the past 3 days. The room went so quiet, Dana could hear the air conditioning cycle on. Blake Whitfield's voice, unmistakable and calm, asked a man named Ken whether he could arrange to have a large shark in the water at a specific set of coordinates on the morning of the 12th of July. Ken's voice, unfamiliar and businesslike, said it was possible but not cheap. Blake said he did not care what it costs. Ken asked for 3 weeks and a schedule. Blake said the schedule would be provided. Detective Chun turned off the recording. He looked out over the meeting room. He said, in a voice that did not need to be raised, that he was placing Mr. Blake Whitfield under arrest on suspicion of solicitation to commit murder, and would the 2 deputies at the back of the room please assist him? Blake did not move. Marla did not move. A woman in the 3rd row started to cry. Someone else laughed once, involuntarily, and then stopped. Blake Whitfield was walked out of the meeting room in handcuffs. The commission chairwoman, a small, tough woman in her late 60s named Cameron Ellis, who had been serving on state environmental boards for longer than Dana had been alive, tapped her microphone twice and said, in a voice that would not tolerate a follow-up question, that the hearing would resume in 30 minutes and would proceed to the public comment portion of the agenda immediately upon return. Dana Pruitt stood up when it was her turn. She did not have notes. She had brought notes. She had left them on the seat. She stood at the podium, and she looked around the room, and she saw Scott Harney with his good hand pressed against his mouth, and she saw Owen Reyes sitting very upright with his glasses off, and she saw Marla Whitfield sitting alone now with her son gone and her back very straight. And she saw about 180 other faces of people who lived on this island and made their livings on this island, and would decide in the next hour what kind of island it was going to be. She said her name. She said she was a marine biologist with the Kona Hydrophone Survey Program. She said she had a story to tell, and it was going to be a short one, and it was true, and she asked the Commission's patience. She told them about the morning of the 12th of July. She told them about the humpback that had pinned her against its chest under a fin the width of a mainsail. She told them about the tiger shark that had never left. She told them, in a voice that did not shake and did not swell, about a young whale that Ruth Alden had named Halo 4 winters ago because the pale, curved scar on the underside of its pectoral fin had looked to Ruth like a crescent of light. She told them that when it mattered, that Whale had chosen to place her own considerable body between a stranger and a predator, and that in a lifetime of watching cetaceans, she had never seen anything like it and did not fully understand it, and did not need to fully understand it, because some things were more important than being understood. She told them what Ruth had underlined in the last notebook of her last winter. She told them that Ruth had been right, and that the reason the Kona pod was coming back was that this water was the last place on this coast that still made sense to them, and that if the Commission voted the way the Whitfield family had spent 3 years and a great many dollars trying to make them vote, that would stop being true, and Ruth Alden had died before she saw the fight through, and Dana was not going to let it stop being true on her watch. Not for Ruth, not for Halo. Not for the boat captain sitting in the front row who had almost been killed for trying to do the right thing 4 days too late for the right person. She said that. She stepped away from the podium. She sat down between Owen and Scott. Owen put his hand on her shoulder. Scott did not move. The Commission voted at 11:43 that morning. The expansion of the West Hawaii Humpback National Marine Sanctuary passed 6-1. Cameron Ellis wrote the sole dissenting vote, a look that Dana would remember for a long time, and adjourned the meeting. Outside on the lawn, the sun was very bright and the trade winds had come up. Dana stood on the grass with Owen and Scott and a small circle of reporters and other researchers, and she answered the questions she could answer, and she declined the ones she couldn't. And she looked across the parking lot once and saw Marla Whitfield being helped into a black sedan by a driver she did not know. And Marla Whitfield turned once as she got into the car and looked at Dana Pruitt across 100 feet of asphalt, and the two women held that look for maybe 3 seconds. Marla's face did not change, but something in her eyes registered that a fight had been lost, in a way that Marla Whitfield had perhaps never quite believed a fight could be lost. And then the door closed and the car pulled out of the lot, and she was gone. Rachel Whitfield was not at the hearing. She did not answer her phone that afternoon. She did not answer it the next day either. Dana called her twice on the 3rd day, and it went to voicemail. And Detective Chun called Dana on the 4th day and told her that Rachel had left the island the morning of the hearing before the vote on a private plane belonging to her grandmother, and had been driven from the airport in Honolulu to a residential facility on the North Shore that was described in the paperwork as a wellness retreat, and in reality was, Detective Chun said carefully, a facility of the kind that families of a certain wealth used to hold family members whose loyalty had become inconvenient. The facility was not illegal. Dana could not get to Rachel through it. Marla Whitfield had the legal paperwork on file to keep Rachel there for up to 90 days without further hearings. Dana asked what she could do. Detective Chun said, on the phone, that he was not authorized to tell her what she could do. He was, however, authorized to tell her that the State Attorney General's office would be filing charges against Marla Whitfield within the week related to her role in the Ken conversation, and that the wellness retreat was located within the jurisdiction of Honolulu County, and that Honolulu County had a very active civil legal aid office and a very sharp reporter at one of the daily papers, and Detective Chun happened to know both of them personally. Dana called the reporter and the legal aid office that afternoon. Rachel Whitfield walked out of the wellness retreat on the 5th of August, escorted by a lawyer from the civil legal aid office and photographed at the door by a reporter from the Honolulu paper. Marla Whitfield had been arrested 3 days earlier. Blake Whitfield's arraignment had been on the front page for a week. The Whitfield family attorney had not shown up for the retreat hearing, and the family judge had ruled that Rachel had been held under invalid paperwork, and Rachel had walked out of the building in the same canvas jacket she had been wearing the night at Anahumalu, and she had gone straight to a phone and called Dana Pruitt. "I told you I would come find you," she said. "You did," Dana said. And that was all either of them said for a while. The rest of that summer was a long, slow unspooling of things. Blake Whitfield pled to a lesser charge and served 40 months. The Kohala Point Marina Village permit was formally denied. The Whitfield Holding Company entered receivership by October. Marla Whitfield, 93 years old and unwilling to face a jury, took a plea to a felony conspiracy charge and was sentenced to 2 years of house arrest, and lived exactly 11 months of that sentence before dying quietly in her sleep in the same house from which she had 10 years earlier run the campaign that had defeated Ruth Alden. Terry Bishop had his fishing license suspended for 2 years and cooperated with the state on the details of the man who had handed him the cash, whose name did in fact turn out to be Ken, and whose full name was Ken Alvarez, and who was, after a 9-month investigation, extradited from Nevada to face charges alongside Blake Whitfield in Hawaii. Terry Bishop's granddaughter started college in the fall of that year on a scholarship set up in Ruth Alden's name by a coalition of small marine research donors, at Dana's quiet suggestion. Terry Bishop, who had gone to grade school with Ruth's youngest brother, cried in a public parking lot when he found out who was paying for it. Scott Harney kept his captain's license. The State Maritime Board considered his testimony at the sanctuary hearing to be a mitigating circumstance of extraordinary weight. Scott spent the rest of that summer rebuilding the wheelhouse on the Ruth Alden, and by Thanksgiving he was back on the water, running research charters for the Marine Lab 3 days a week, and small groups of school kids the other 2. He did not charge the school kids. Rachel Whitfield came home to the Big Island in September. She did not come home to any Whitfield property. She rented a small studio apartment above a bookstore in Kailua, and she took a paying job at the Sea Turtle Rescue that had previously been her volunteer work, and she legally changed her name to Rachel Alden, and she gave Dana Pruitt the news over dinner at Dana's kitchen table in a voice that trembled once and then did not tremble again. "Ruth deserves a family," Rachel said. "Somebody has to carry her name forward. I would like it to be me." Dana pushed her chair back from the table and walked around it and put her arms around Rachel Alden's shoulders. And for a long time, neither of them said anything. The kitchen smelled of grilled fish and lime. The trade wind was coming through the open window. Halfway across the world, somewhere in the deep, cold pastures of the Alaskan Gulf, an old humpback and her 5-year-old daughter were most likely feeding. The following February, on the last calm morning before a big storm system pushed in from the northwest, Dana took the Ruth Alden out to the 80-foot ledge with Scott at the wheel and Owen on the aft deck, and Rachel Alden sitting cross-legged in the bow with a hydrophone across her knees. It was not a scheduled research trip. It was the morning after the first anniversary of the day Halo had come out of the blue and pressed Dana into her chest and given her a choice she had not understood at the time. Dana had said nothing about the anniversary. She had just told Owen and Scott and Rachel that she wanted to go out. They dropped the hydrophone at the ledge. They shut off the engine. They drifted with the current, which is the same current that had carried Dana the year before. The sun came up over the shoulder of the mountain behind them and lit up the water in a wide gold band. Nobody talked much. Scott poured coffee from a new thermos into 4 cups. Owen watched the depth finder and did not comment when a large signal ghosted past at 70 feet. Rachel put on the headphones from the hydrophone amplifier, and after a minute, her face did something Dana had not seen it do before. Something opened up. "There is a pulse train," Rachel said quietly. Dana took the headphones. She listened. She closed her eyes. She listened again. It was Halo. It was Halo, and it was Halo's mother. They were somewhere north and below, and they were moving slowly, and the pulse train was the same one Dana had recorded the year before, and this time, as Dana listened, the whales added a second call, low and long and unmistakable, of a kind Dana had heard once before in her life, off Molokini on a winter dawn, when Ruth Alden had leaned over the gunwale of a small skiff with her hair full of salt and said, "That call there, Dana? That call is the one they use to say, 'I see you.'" Dana kept her eyes closed. She lifted her palm off the deck and pressed it flat against the aluminum hull of the Ruth Alden. She could feel the vibration of the water through the metal. She thought about a wall of grey coming at her sideways, a year and a lifetime ago, and a barnacled fin the width of a mainsail curling down over her head. She thought about how she had fought it. She thought about the moment she had stopped fighting it and pressed her hand flat against something she did not understand and held on. She said quietly, so that only Rachel could hear her, "I see you too." Then she sat up. She handed the headphones back to Rachel Alden. She looked at Scott Harney at the wheel and at Owen Reyes at the depth finder and at the wide gold band of Kona morning light on the water where she had once been held, briefly and gently, in a shadow the shape of an outstretched wing. And she said in her ordinary voice that they should head in before the storm came up. They headed in. The trade wind picked up on the way. The Ruth Alden ran clean and light with the swells behind her. And when they came around the last point before the harbour mouth, Rachel Alden stood up in the bow with one hand on the rail and turned her face to the wind and laughed once, out loud, at nothing in particular, at everything all at once, at being alive on a February morning above water she had chosen to belong to. Behind them, somewhere back on the ledge, 2 whales, who had once, for reasons that belonged only to themselves, decided that a woman in a wetsuit was worth saving, went on with their own private business in a language that a great many people were now, at last, working very hard to learn. If this story moved you, take a second to hit like, tell me in the comments what part hit hardest, and subscribe so the next one comes right to you when it drops. Because there are a lot more stories where this one came from, and I would very much like to keep telling them to you.